Another edition of Cooking a la Quarantine, and we're doing a field trip. We're going to talk about one of my favorite subjects, beer. This is Franklinton Winslow. He's the head brewmaster here at Tarboro Brewing Company, and I'll let him guide us through this.
Yeah, so obviously welcome to Tarboro and welcome to Tarboro Brewing Company. Today I guess we're going to take a quick spin through the brewery and talk about some of the process.
Okay.
And sort of show off the equipment we're operating here. And then I think some of that's going to take us into looking at how we actually put the beer into cans, because I think that's something that not a lot of people know about as well.
I don't know about cans. Now, beer, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't beer one of the main beginnings of civilization?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've got a part that I always like to point out is that you can go for about 6 weeks without food, about 6 days without liquid, and about 6 minutes without air. So if you go back and look at things, why did civilization settle down and stop moving around in hunter-gatherer kind of circles?
Right.
Well, it's because they found something that was worth stopping to do that for.
Right.
Everyone says bread. Well, they had bread, but the bread was barely edible. What they did with the bread was actually use that to capture the yeast and let that re-ferment, and then they drank that instead, and so that was their liquid. It was safe to drink because it was fermented and had a low pH, and no pathogens could survive in it because of the alcohol and things. But also, it helped them change their experience a little bit with the alcohol. So it became something that, not just getting food, which was, available everywhere, but they could actually, stay in one location, not have to worry about spoiling their water source, which was why so many hunter-gatherer societies moved around. So.
And for those of you that don't know, that's why Plymouth was founded, because the Pilgrims ran out of beer because they couldn't drink the salt water. So, How do you make beer?
Right. Well, to jump into it, the Germans believe with their laws that there were really only 3 ingredients that you needed. You needed water, you needed malt, and you needed hops. That was a law that they made back in the day. Sorry, my mic seems to be dancing around on me here. But so you needed malt, water, and hops. And you put those 3 things together, add a little of what they called the God is gut, which was these magic bubbles, the God is good, that sat on top of the beer when it was working. And you took some from one batch and added it to the next batch, and it turned out really good. Turns out that was the yeast, but we didn't know that was the yeast at the time.
Right.
It wasn't until much later microbiology was created, also by brewers in the Carlsberg laboratory, but that's where Louis Pasteur made all his discoveries about yeast and pasteurization. All those ideas came from the brewing industry.
Right.
But so for us, we're not limited by the German law, the Reinheitsgebot, but we're using, so we can use more than just barley malt. We use wheat, oats, even some rice and corn for some other variations on the different styles of beer. And we're going to crush that stuff up. And we could actually go take a look at that over in the mill room here.
All right, let's go. So what's this?
So here we've got a couple different types of malts. So as you can see, they're little barley corns, and they've been kilned they've been sprouted first to get all the enzymes active, and then they've been kilned to different levels of color, and one of them's also been roasted. So if you sort of take a little sniff of that, you can sort of tell it's got like a...
Oh, yeah, even through the mask you can smell that.
And this one, similar, but it's going to have a different kind of a lighter character to it. It's not as intense. So by mixing these up with some base malts from some of our other suppliers like Epiphany, who's out in Durham, and some other guys that are nearby, we're able to put together a whole bunch of different styles by taking a fairly neutral base malt, running it through the mill to crack it and get it ready for the process, and then adding specialty malts to change the color, change the body, change the mouthfeel a little bit of the beer to make sure we nail different brewing traditions and the styles, or come up with something completely new, which is something we've been talking about doing.
Right. Just straight. Not only are you a local brewery, but you're using local grains from Durham.
Yeah, so the maltster himself is in Durham, and he sources grains both locally and from around the world to sort of recreate different malt styles. So the Oktoberfest beer that we brew, we call it Oktoberfest because we're clever. But that malt is actually coming from some of the same growing regions in Germany in Index that a lot of the breweries in Germany are using to make their fest beers as well. And at the same time, things like our wheat and some of our other ingredients are coming from the local region, so that we can use a local product. Both it gives us the ability to both target certain flavor profiles that are traditionally expected, as well as using a local product when we can take advantage of that to create a flavor that's closer to home, so to speak.
Okay, so we put the grain through here.
We drop the grain through the mill. It cracks it just enough so that we can get at the starchy bits in between, and then once we've got it cracked and in the grist case, we can run it through the auger up to the brew house where we'll start the process up there.
Well, let's go to the brew house.
So this is our brew house. On the left-hand side, we have our mash tun, and that's basically when we're bringing the grist over from the grist case. We drop it in from the top and mix it with hot water, and that reactivates all the enzymes that the little seeds would normally use to sort of sprout and grow into a plant. But we use that to convert all the starch that's in that seed to turn it into sugar, or basically to make a big pot of sweet wort is what the term for it is. But it's basically just sugar water. We're converting the starch into sugar so that we can use that for fermentation later.
Right, because the sugar feeds the yeast, and the yeast byproduct is alcohol.
Alcohol and carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
So basically, this is it's like a big mixer. We've got rakes that spin around inside, and then there's a strainer, a sieve, a bunch of plates that help separate the solids from the liquids, so that we can then take the liquid that's in here and transfer it through the pumps over into the kettle that's on the other side, where we do the boil.
Okay.
And so this next vessel is our kettle. It's steam jacketed, so we'll run the wort over into the kettle, bring it up to a boil, make sure that we've got the right sugar concentration and volume, and add hops for bitterness, and then anything else that needs to go in. If we're making IPAs, we'll put a lot of hops in at the end. If we're making something that has less of a hop character or has maybe a spice flavor or some other things, we may add some things into the kettle there. And then when we're done with that boil, at that point it'll have the water, the malt, the hops, and the yeast would be the last thing we'd need to add to it, but it's still well over 200 degrees at that point. So we run it through a heat exchanger down here and re-add oxygen into it, since we've boiled all the oxygen out to give the yeast something to breathe, so to speak. And once it's down to about 70 degrees, we'll run that over to the fermenters. But we also, so cooling it down, we've got to run something in the opposite direction. So we specifically have a cold liquor tank, which we use just to make hot water, basically. So we run the cold water through. That collects that sort of collects all the heat, trades out the heat during the heat exchanger run, and we end up recycling all of that water and all of that energy that we use to heat the water, boil the beer. We transfer that back into the hot water tank, and we recycle that so it doesn't just go to the drain, and so that all that energy isn't just lost, and we get to use that for the next batch of beer or for cleaning or for whatever purpose. So it's important to us to make sure that we're not wasting any more than we have to. We're not just running stuff into the drain or letting it just go into the ether, so to speak, with the energy.
So you're telling me that brewing beer is a green...
Making anything spends a lot of energy and resources, but we try to be as green as we can, and I think that's true for most of the breweries who are out there, trying to be as green a process as we can and recycle and reuse what we're able to do.
You heard that. Drinking beer is environmentally friendly. Where's our next step?
So from there, we're going to run over into fermentation.
Oh, well. All right, so what's this?
So after we've finished with fermentation, we've got everything except the yeast. Once we get it cold, we can bring it into these tanks, and these tanks actually have conical-shaped bottoms so that when the yeast is done fermenting, they'll sort of drop down into the bottom of those cones, and we can collect that yeast, and because it's a living organism, just put it into a new batch of beer. And in that new batch of beer, it's got oxygen, it's got all the food it could need, it's got all the nutrients that it needs, and it's got this perfect temperature right around 70 degrees for ales. Lagers like to be a little bit cooler depending on what yeast you're using. And at that point, they do what anybody would do when they're happy. They start making babies. And once they've sort of used up all the oxygen, they'll switch over and begin fermenting. And that fermentation process is when it's taking the sugar and breaking that down into alcohol and carbon dioxide. And that carbon dioxide will usually just let bubble out of the tank for the most part. Because if you try and keep it, it would actually really build up, damage the tank. But the alcohol obviously stays in the product, and when everything's done, we'll cap the fermenter and capture a little bit of that residual carbon dioxide to help carbonate the beer. And then we'll just we'll get it real cold to encourage the yeast to drop out and let things clear naturally and mature. There's a little maturation process that needs to happen.
Okay.
And at that point, the beer is usually ready to test. So sanitation's a big deal, so we got to make sure we get everything nice and clean.
No, of course.
We got a little bit of the you can see the fruit maybe on that one. This is our seed spitter. We're getting ready for the release in the spring.
Yeah,
smell the watermelon.
This is the stuff that smells like watermelon.
Yeah, you might have been able to see the pink as it came through because the fruit is still settling in the tank a bit.
If you look at it, I mean, if we had Willy Wonka's smell-o-vision, it'd smell like a watermelon.
Yeah, but that's all real fruit. There's no extract in that. We puree the watermelons here ourselves. Use local watermelons as much as we can, and obviously the beer. People want it so much that it's hard to get it year round. So we have to pick and choose when we can find the best watermelons, and this is actually stuff we brewed it and sort of lagered it over the winter so that we'd have the local watermelons. But a lot of times if we run out and people need it, the first couple of the batches are sometimes using stuff from elsewhere, and everybody agrees it's just not the same. But it's a real product, and it changes seasonally with what's available to us. So
again, another local product using local products. This keeps getting better.
Yeah, and the Ace container too from right up the street.
And the Ace container down the street. So what's the next step after we got this beer?
So after the beer's done and everything's cold and it's settled like this, depending on what we're doing, we might run it through the filter. Or for a lot of the beers, this style in particular, we may go straight into the fermenter and leave it as an unfiltered product, into the bright tank. And in this tank here, we're able to do our last, quality control checks, things like checking to make sure that the microbiologicals, it's stable. There's nothing in there that's going to cause problems. That the pH and the gravity, that the alcohol percentage are correct. And then obviously the most important test, which you could do now. Take a little sip.
Well, he doesn't have to tell me twice. That tastes like watermelon beer.
Cool. So you approve?
I approve. It's cooking a la quarantine approved.
Good to go. So yeah, at that point, it's time to package it.
Okay. Well, how do you package it? Do we use bottles or?
We'll step over there.
Okay. So you were talking about Oktoberfest.
Oktoberfest.
That's one of these.
Yep.
And you can put a lid on this.
Well, that's actually had the lid taken off already, but so we used that for a tester. We had a couple extra cans left over at the end of last year. But yeah, we would basically take one of these cans and we'll load them onto the infeed table here. And you can see it's basically just like a cup with a flared top on it.
Town Common.
So those will ride through onto the conveyor here and come through into the, after getting a quick little sanitization, we'll get, they'll run into the filler here. And as they're running along, the fill heads will pop up, and this will drop underneath it. It'll purge it with carbon dioxide because we don't want to get oxygen into the beer. And then it'll start filling from the bottom of the can, sort of using that little blanket of carbon dioxide to keep it from running into oxygen. And then as it gets to the top, it'll start to foam over, and it'll run down the line to this other spot where we're going to, again, purge it with carbon dioxide, clear a little bit of the foam off, and if everything goes as expected, it'll actually catch one of the lids on the lid drop here, and as it pulls that down, the can will be covered, and it'll get a little tap on the lid, and that's ready to go for the seaming process from there.
Well, can we see it happen?
Let's have a go.
Let's give it a shot.
So we've got our seamer spinning really fast, and what's going to happen is as the can enters, it's going to trigger the process. It's going to lift the can up onto the chuck, we call it, and then the two rollers are going to pop in, rolling the lid and the can together, and then the second one's going to actually seam it by pressing the two flat. And there you got it.
And the first shot.
Beautiful.
Look at that. Seamed.
Water won't fall out. Perfect.
Yep, just like that. Okay, now, before anybody freaks out, we are 12 feet apart. We've measured it by the beer. And so I'm just going to sit here and we're going to talk about some of this stuff. And, why not try some of this local beer? I've got the seed spitter, which I tested out over there. And what do you have, Franklinton?
I'm drinking our Bryant's Brown Ale, which is sort of an English brown. We actually took best in state with this year. Got a gold medal for it at the Brewers Cup, so we're proud of it.
Well, there you go. So now that we're done with the whole process of beer, let's talk about the more important part. Society was started through beer.
Yeah.
So how do you see beer affecting our society here in Edgecombe County?
Well, I've always said, even I guess it was 5 years ago, the night that we opened, part of the toast that I had while we were down at the Underground down the street, when we delivered our first kegs, literally 5 years ago last night, it was about, it really does take a village to raise a pint. And I think that idea, we wouldn't have started this. Einie was in New York, I was in Philadelphia, but we both had this feeling that this town both could support and sort of deserved the benefits that a small enterprise like a brewery could bring. There's lots of evidence that breweries have done things rejuvenating downtown corridors and adding kind of being a linchpin to commercial districts and things like that. But I really feel like that's something that fit well for both the town of Tarboro and also for the people who are here. In a way, it was something that we could do to give back and open a business that was going to, create a local space with a tap room right here on Main Street and give people a place to come out and, pre-COVID, spend time with friends and tilt back a pint. And, maybe not everybody agrees about how things go, but, over a beer, it's a lot easier to come to some agreement about the fact that, we're all in this together. And, I think it's a space where you don't have to worry about politics or religion or whatever's divisive. You can all sit down and agree or disagree about what your favorite beer is and, talk about it. And I think that's one of the important things is having those conversations and having that space.
Right. And I was a history teacher. Mesopotamia and Sumeria, they were all founded on the process of beer. And
yeah,
man, that tastes like watermelon kombucha. I'm not kidding. So,
yeah. Well, and as you're saying with Mesopotamia, sure enough, you've got the ability to take these grains, but you can't be a moving hunter-gatherer society. You've got to settle down and start the agricultural process. And I think that was a big change because there's really no reason to settle if you've got food available everywhere.
right.
Why stop and settle in one place, especially if you know you're going to soil your water? Because people did understand that the water would become bad, just from, people being there for too long, and all the gross things that go along with
Yes.
that. But so yeah, why stop and stay when you run that risk? And I think beer is definitely one of those things. And a lot of advancement, people don't give enough credit to. Like I said, microbiology was created by basically the brewing industry and Louis Pasteur at Carlsberg Brewery, and the rail cars across America. Certainly, moving beer was one of those things early on in the process. Refrigeration, lagering goes way back. All of these things. I think it's interesting to see. There's little aspects of society that beer has touched on that I think people miss out on or don't realize or don't even think about in the day to day. Germ theory. And you got to thank Pasteur for really sort of coming back to ways to fight pathogens.
And for those of you that don't know who Louis Pasteur was, that's where you get the word pasteurized. It kills all the bacteria and nasties in milk and everything else. So, just so we get this clear, what exactly is your background?
I keep talking about microbiology, and that's where my formal training was. I was doing research in cancer and HIV and even some anthrax diagnostic stuff. And before I decided, I was doing that to sort of see if I wanted to continue on to do an MD or an MD PhD. And along the way, I sort of realized I'd been in school for a long time, and I kind of just wanted to do something for myself at some point. And I'd started a brewing, home brewing club at the Abramson Family Cancer Research Institute. And, we'd get together, and the people seemed to enjoy the beer. And as I was talking about what the next steps were when I was going to take a little time for myself, everybody was like, well, why don't you try brewing? And, I said, no one will pay you money to do that because I'd only done it as a home brewer. And sure enough, I was wrong. There is actually an industry, and it had sprung up quite quickly since early 2000. I think it was not too long after that where I was walking down the street here and saw the building all sort of boarded up, papered up, I guess, in the windows inside, and realized, this actually wouldn't be a bad spot for one. But it was still many years until Aini and I kind of got talking about it and realized that we both had the same idea about dropping a brewery here and seeing what that could do for the community. But yeah, I was doing research, and I basically just found a different way to do my experiments. And instead of having to run them through the incinerator when I'm done because they were all dangerous or harmful, we get to actually enjoy them and share them a little bit more between folks. And I get to do a little more artistry, I think, in this. The science is beautiful, and just it's another thing that I think the science and the art in beer are so intertwined with coming up with and finding that great product and the great process and innovating new things too. So, like that seed spitter was collaboration with a friend of mine up in when I was working at Yards at one of the breweries up in Philadelphia, and we were talking about new things, and we just got into this idea that I was thinking about watermelons, and it would just sort of seem like making a sour ale using watermelon would be really fun. And we got on his little brew house and tested it out, and it was great.
There you go. And that's using local North Carolina watermelons for the most part.
That's what's in that glass.
So, in this glass, what you're seeing is North Carolina. People say got to be NC. got to be community. And, you know, I used to live in Tarboro. When I was my first year teaching, I moved down here. This was a boarded up old car dealership. Main Street was kind of not what it is now. And if you look down Main Street, there are people, this is a place for people to congregate. This is, and everything, I mean, beer is really the building block of society. So, with that burp being said, I hope you all enjoyed it. Remember, be kind, be excellent to each other, and have a great day. We'll see you soon.